I wanted to start off by, first of all, thanking Rueven Kimelman for this great idea of, it says 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So maybe 2 rabbis, 4 opinions, who knows? But this was certainly something that he brought to my attention and thought it would be a good idea. And I was very happy and honored to be asked and to be a part of it. And the idea is that I'm going to, so first of all, for those of you who don't know from my class, Rueven Kimelman is professor at Brandeis, is a dear friend. And that's first and foremost my connection to him, as well as a teacher and someone that I learned from. And anytime he is in our shul, in our congregation, all of us enjoy hearing him and share Torah. So tonight is another treat that we get to hear and share Torah from each other. And the idea is that we thought the structure would be is that each of us would share an insight into the Parsha and perhaps weigh in on each other, but you'll get different perspectives, different styles, and the net result, God willing, we'll all be smarter for it. So that's really what's going on here today. What do you say, Rueven? Shall we begin?
We shall begin.
Okay. So the topic that I'm going to discuss really at first is the idea of this ladder. You know, this idea of ladder has been the subject of many paintings, many sort of storylines in our Judaism. But the truth of the matter is it's only one small verse. And it begins at the very beginning of this week's Torah portion. And as we know, nothing is arbitrary. Everything has significance. Everything has meaning that we must take to heart. So I'm going to try to share, as I always do, what is the meaning that we can take in our personal lives in the very moment that we find ourselves in. In general, Torah is Melashon Hara'ah. When we have the Torah, for those of you who come to our shul, we know that every Shabbos I say that this is the most important Shabbos of our life, because in this Torah portion is given to us specifically what we need, the spiritual DNA, in order to combat the week ahead of us. So once again, we find ourselves in a strange world. We haven't come out of it yet, from what I can tell. And we have to look deep into the Torah for the messages and meaning in order to propel us, armor us, guard us, and give us, most importantly, the inspiration to move forward. So I'm going to encourage everybody to, if you can, show us your face. We don't see you during the week. We don't see you during Shabbat. So it's always great if you're able to show us your face. If not, you can always turn off the mute button. So yeshikah for that. So we'll begin. Last week, we just finished the concept of Jacob becomes the person who gets the blessings from his father Yitzchak. After a whole shenanigans with his mother and dressing up like Esav, very, very strange. That was for last week. A lot of commentary on that, but now we're moving forward. After many years of Jacob still living in his parents' domain, in his Haredi bubble of Shem ve'Aver, Beersheva, he's asked, as the first word of this week's Torah portion is Vayeitzei Yaakov mi Beersheva, Vayelech Harana. He leaves Beersheva, he leaves the comfort zone of where he was, learning Torah and hanging out and davening, and now he has to go to Haran. We know that Haran is not a wonderful place. It's not Disneyland. Not only has to go to Haran, he has to go ahead and ultimately meet Laban, who is not exactly the greatest character in the whole world. So he's leaving Esav, who is not the greatest character, and he's heading into Haran and going to meet Laban, who's also not the greatest character, and he's alone. For the first time in his life, he's forced to experience the exposure of the outside world as we know it, or as he knows it. It's a very different place. He's completely out of his comfort zone. And at this point, he has to recalibrate his own spiritual existence. When you find yourselves in the confines and the presence of a shul, of a synagogue, or a very religious community, it could be a lot easier to toe the line. It could be a lot easier to be spiritually connected. Once you leave that, how do you find your own spiritual strength? How do you find your own spiritual focus? Everything you knew has been taken away from you. You have to recalibrate your entire spiritual identity in order to withstand everything that's going to happen around you. Even more so, for the most part, we know that Jacob was a type of character, he tried to avoid confrontation. We see in last week's Torah portion that as soon as Esav comes in to see his father, Yaakov leaves out the back door. He's always hiding with his mom to do these plans. They don't head on this situation. There was no family therapy. There probably should have been in retrospect, but there was no family therapy. They don't talk about their problems. They're avoiding them. They're sneaking in to get past. Now all of a sudden, Jacob is forced to leave this comfort zone experience and go into a whole new territory. But if we really want to know how Jacob ultimately becomes Yisrael, how Jacob becomes the leader of the Jewish nation, we have to tap into this week's Torah portion. And there's something in there for each and every single one of us. How do we become a member of the Jewish nation as opposed to just one individual? Jacob doesn't only move from the position of being one person and ultimately having 12 tribes. In this week's Torah portion, we see the metamorphosis, the complete transformation, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of, not just in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality. Who does Jacob become? He's not the same person he was last Torah portion. He becomes an entire different experience. The leader of the Jewish people, the father of the 12 tribes, Mitasei Shlema. How does this all happen? Where does he find the strength to face the challenges and the difficulties and the strange area that he finds himself in? You know, when you are brought up in a religious community, which I was not, I grew up in Venice Beach, California, but I've lived in Jewish and religious communities. I lived in Crown Heights, I lived in Eretz Yisrael, and it's wonderful. The biggest complexities you may have is who got the nicest challah first when you're at the shuk. And you can struggle on that. I got it first, you got it first, but in the end, you're all buying challahs for Shabbos. What's the big difference? Everybody's wired in the same way. Over here, it's a completely different experience. You're forced to find a little bit more about yourself that you would not be able to if you were still in Beersheba. Hashem Dafka wants Jacob to leave his space and go into an area where he has to learn more about who he is, what he can accomplish, what his strengths are, and of course, ultimately, how to share those strengths with his family and his future and Klal Yisrael. And ultimately, we see, as we know that next week's Torah portion, the struggle continues. He meets an angel. We'll get to the ladder soon. He meets an angel, and he struggles with the angel. And because he's victorious and he struggles with the angel, he moves from Jacob to Yisrael. The transition starts to happen. Right now, he's still transitioning. He hasn't transitioned yet. So what is this aha moment? Where does Jacob find the ability to truly dig in deep and handle everything that's coming around him? The noise is great. We think it's great now. The noise was very large and very loud for Jacob. So let's listen to this and see if we can something we can pull into our own experience. Maybe it's the second verse, third verse. As soon as Jacob leaves from Beersheba to Haran, he goes to sleep. He has a dream. What's the dream? The famous dream, there's a ladder. And there's angels that are ascending and descending. There's a very interesting commentary, Medrash, that says that are the angels ascending and descending on the ladder, or are they ascending and descending on Jacob himself? As it were, maybe Jacob is this ladder, and the angels are ascending and descending. Why are they ascending and descending? Well, they are ascending because we know it says Israel, in whom I will be glorified. It's Isaiah 49. What does that mean? That Yisrael, the Jewish people, Hashem will be glorified in the behavior of the Jewish people. So if we are the people that can glorify God, or God has glorified in us, that's a pretty ascending level. So the angels ascend and they see, oh, these are the Jewish people. They go to heaven and say, wow, God glorifies himself in them. They descend right down. What do they see? Jacob is sleeping. So what's going on here? Who is it? Are these people the image of God, or are they sleeping? When times are rough, what are they representing? What are they about? Now, it's okay to take a nap while you travel. There's nothing wrong with that. But if angels are poking and prodding you, wanting to know which one are you, then it behooves you to figure out what is taka happening and what is your ability. So what we need to understand is that Jacob ultimately realizes from this experience and this vision that he has through his dream is that he himself actually is the ladder that connects heaven and earth. The ascending and descending angels that are on him are their way and God's way of letting him know that he has the ability to reach the highest level to ascend. In the experience of humanity is unfortunately one where we continuously find ourselves descending for different reasons. We're constantly challenges. We may have a brother Esav. We may have a challenge of Corona. Whatever it is in our life, it's never a perfect, trajectory. Always, that's when Mashiach comes. When we have redemptive error, utopian error will always have that. Otherwise, there's dissensions and ascensions. You read the Zutzar Chaliyah, and it's back and forth. But Jacob's able to survive because he has this vision. He realizes that as low as he may find himself and as difficult as it will be, at some point of his ladder reaches heaven. So there's a part of him that can always reach heaven. And this ability to reach heaven ultimately is the very, very purpose and the existence of creation. That all of us from one side, the bottom of the ladder, the feet of the ladder are on the ground. And one can say, present company excluded, that the feet of the ladder, they're not just in the ground, but they maybe even dug in the dirt. But yet there's another part of us that also reaches heaven. So the ability for Jacob to understand that he can always look up and always connect and recognize that he should always be in the image of God, and he has the ability to be in the image of God no matter the circumstances. That propels him to be able to withstand whatever challenges comes his way. Remember, he pays a big price for this. He works for Rachel and doesn't get her, then he does another 7 years for Laban. Jacob is continuously struggles. And yet from Jacob specifically, we see this is the expression of when we come into a people, more than Abraham and more than Isaac. And Jacob struggles with not being able to have Rachel right away, and Rachel can't have kids right away. And she finally has kids. She has Joseph, and we'll look. And then Joseph he thinks Joseph is dead. So, how does he withstand this? How does he able to find a way? How does he maintain this level of Jacobness or Yisrael? Is by ultimately being able to recognize that every single one of us is born in the image of God. Many of us think of ourselves in terms of our own personal image, perhaps as the picture on our passport, the picture on our driver's license. If we get pulled over by the cops, we have an image that he should identify who we are. That's not our image. That's not what we're about. It's not what we look like on the passport. Our image is B'Tselem Elokim, Adam Adomeh Elyon. And as soon as Jacob realizes this, the sky is the limit, pun intended. So ultimately, this is the vision that propels Jacob to move forward and to withstand everything coming around him. Now, why is this so critical, of course, in our moment, in our time? There's a concept called Bishvili Nivra Olam, the world was created for me. Now, you could think that this is a narcissistic behavior, but it's not meant for that. On the contrary, the world was created for me in order for me to go impact and do whatever I can and give of myself to make the world a better place. This creates a certain element of both excitement and pressure and recognizing what is incumbent upon us. And why do I say this? Because I've been thinking a lot about this lately, especially with Hanukkah coming up. And for most of you know, some of my friends over here, that Hanukkah is a time that we really lean into the community and we share the light and we give menorahs and we bring light to the crowd. And, you know, last year, this time I would go to sleep at night thinking, how do I get 1,000 people on a rooftop in downtown Boston? And this year I have a different type of dream. And the dream I have this year is the same dream, but a different tactic, is how to reach 1,000 Jews that they should have menorah, those that didn't have. They should have light, those didn't have. That's called Bishvili Nivra Olam, to think, how can I change the world? And I get this from Jacob. I get this from this week's Torah portion. One person can change the world. You can change your sphere, and that sphere has changed other people. If, God forbid, you are hanging by 1 foot on a cliff, that's probably not the best time to go to sleep. I think many times all of us see ourselves as someone hanging on a cliff. It's very uncertain times on so many different fronts. So this would not be the time to go to sleep. This is the time to get up and to recognize that we can make differences, that we can't make a change. One person, one Jacob, he moves from Jacob to Yisrael. Why? Because he's not scared to challenge the struggle head on. Everybody here, not just on this Zoom call, but every Zoom call going on around the world, has a struggle that they're facing today. We know this. And if we take on the struggle head on and we move from the Jacob way of was trying to avoid struggle to the Yisrael way, who actually takes on the challenge and takes on the struggle, even if it means a struggle with an angel, we are sure to be successful. And for each person, that struggle is different. You know, it says on Motzei Shabbat, it's interesting, Chabad actually doesn't have the minhag to say it, but it's in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, but most communities say it, certainly in the Sephardic community, Al tira avdi Yaakov. Do not be scared, my servant Jacob. When you're Yisrael, when Jacob moves to Yisrael, we don't need to warn him to be scared because he's Yisrael, he's fine, he's perfect. He just had Shabbos, he's wonderful. But Motzei Shabbat, he moves from this extra soul that he got at Shabbat from the Sham Yisera of Yisrael. Now he slips back into Yaakov. So we tell him, Al tirav di Yaakov. You may think that you're slipping back to Yaakov. Don't be scared. The truth of the matter is that you're really Yisrael. Inside each and every single one of us is Yisrael, is the Jewish people. And it's coming Hanukkah, we have the opportunity to go ahead and give light. I want to conclude with one small idea that maybe drives us home. There was a story that I read recently, my wife shared to me, about the Kloisenberger Rebbe. The Kloisenberger Rebbe was famous, sadly, because he tragically lost his wife and 11 kids. After the Holocaust, he remarried and had built a new family with 7 more kids. He passed away, I think it was in 1994. So major tzaddik. And they asked him, do you have any questions for God? For everything that happened to you, do you have any questions for God? He said, do I have questions for God? He said, of course I have questions for God. I have a lot of questions for God. I have big questions for God. And I have no doubt that when the time comes and I go to heaven, I meet my maker and I meet Hashem, I will ask him all my questions. And he will answer me all the questions to satisfaction, because God can do that. He says, but I'd rather be down here with the questions than be up there with the answers. Right now we are here. Right now, these are the questions that we need to deal with. Don't be scared of the questions. Ask the questions, deal with the questions, struggle with the questions, but move forward. Thank God, every single one of us is not in the position like in the Holocaust times where those who were brave and made crazy efforts to have a menorah was digging a menorah out of a potato and finding a wick to make a Chanukiah in those times. That's not that long ago. It's with less than 100 years, as we know. Today, you can order on Amazon a menorah of any size, of oil of any size, of color of any size, in this craziness. So let's not forget the moment that we're in, what our possibilities are, what our capabilities are, and take full advantage of it. And I'll conclude for the second time, let's learn from Jacob. It says, Mayshe of the simin labanim unasinas koyach labanim. The stories of our parents should give us a sense of strength and a sense of inertia to push through and to be able to accomplish everything that he was doing, from one person to many, and from a person who perhaps was scared to leave his bubble to take it on head on. So, Ayashikoach, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to pass the mic over to Rueven for some thoughts, and looking forward to hearing from you as well.
Well, thank you so much, Mayshe. This is going to be quite a complimentary presentations. Just those who joined us late realize that our structure is, Mayshe began on the issue of the ladder of Jacob, and I will comment. Then I will move on to the deceit of Jacob by Laban, and he will comment. And then we open up to the whole audience, any questions or comments you want to make, so you all get involved. Back to the ladder of Jacob, Sulam. This Sulam is Mutzav Arza, V'rosho Magia Shemaima. It must be extraordinarily significant because of the verse which follows. It says, Ufaratzta Yama Kema Tzafona V'negba. That one spreads out in all 4 directions as if Yaakov was a prescient Chabadnik. And then it says, V'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot adama u'vizar acha. And it repeats the blessing that was given to Abraham, that Abraham, all the families of the earth will be blessed by him. Not the individuals, but families, that is, in their collectivities, in their nationalities. Now, Abraham was blessed alone. It is Jacob, or Yaakov, who's a transmission of the blessing of Yaakov, or the blessing of Abraham, to the rest of the Jewish people. And the key word is the last word of chapter 28, verse 14. It says, Uvizar acha. Up till now, it was only Abraham. Abraham transmitted it to Yitzchak. But Yaakov is transmitting it to all his descendants. So by virtue of Yaakov, the Jewish people has a mandate. What is that mandate? To become a blessing to all peoples, whether they bless them or whether they curse them. That's the binaries in the very beginning of chapter 12. So whether they bless Israel or curse Israel, all humanity will receive their blessings through Israel. And that probably accounts for the significance of the ladder, the Sulam. The Sulam is rooted in the ground, but stretches toward heaven. And in Jewish and Christian mysticism, the ladder is symbolizes the 4 dimensions of prayer. Starts in Christianity, the idea of the ladder, but picked up by Judaism and developed, and let me explain the difference. According to the commentaries on the Siddur, the service in the morning is divided into 4 parts. The first part is Birchot HaShachar, which deals with our bodily needs. Then Psukei de Zimra, which is the singing toward God, from the word Zimra, which means lizmor, to cut away the impediments between us and God. Then we move into the third section called Kriyat Shema Uvirchateha, the Shema liturgy, and finally the Amidah. They correspond to the 4 worlds of consciousness, which are called Asiyah, the world of actualization, Yetzirah, the world of creation, Briyah, the final ultimate world of creation, and Atzilut is the Amidah, because Atzilut comes from the word etz, stand by, and in the Amidah, it says we're standing next to God, and we enter Atzilut. So these 4 rungs reflect the human experience of prayer. What is the difference between the Jewish conception and the Christian conception? Way back in the 4th century, Syrian Christian monastic fathers called prayer a ladder. And what do they argue? You go up the ladder, like Jack and the Beanstalk, to ascend to God. And the function of prayer is to join with God and the angels. But according to Jewish mysticism, primarily the Alter Rebbe, he calls the Sulam, it says, Olim v'yordim bo. That is, a ladder is dual directional, not unidirectional as it was in Christianity, but dual directional, means we go up, Olim v'yordim, and what comes down. So according to this, we go up in prayer, but the function of prayer is to bring the Shekhinah back down into the world. In other words, the function of prayer is not to escape reality or to escape our everyday reality. The function of prayer is to connect ourselves with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world. So in the Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, in Parshas B'Shalach, he refers to tefillah as Hu HaMachaber Lahanot HaTachnon El Helyon V'Lavi Et Helyon L'Tachton. The reason it's called a ladder or sulam because it's dual directional. Its goal is for us to go up, but the purpose for us to go up is Lavi Et Helyon L'Tachton, to bring that which is the upper spheres down into the lower spheres. And then he says, Al derech mashal halicha bisulam. Just like the going of a ladder goes up and down, so our prayer. This is a very significant distinction between Christian mysticism and Jewish mysticism. The goal is not to reach heaven. The goal is to bring heaven down into earth. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitaveh l'dira b'tachtonim. Through our prayer, we give God residence in this world. We bring God down into the world, and the presence of God in this world is to be transformative. So prayer really succeeds when it brings about a greater effectiveness in us in changing the world. So I would see prayer is like recharging our batteries, and you recharge the light. The light has to bring light to the darkness. As the Alter Rebbe used to say, a little light, megarish, expels a lot of darkness. So from the point of view of the ladder, Jacob becomes the model of praying, of going up and down. So the result is all the nations of the world will bless themselves by him. That means Jacob's prayer is not to reach heaven. Jacob's prayer is to reintroduce God into this world. And when Jacob reintroduces God into this world, all the nations or all the families of the world are blessed by him, and his descendants, which who are us. That gives us our mandate. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the deceit. Really the problematic question of the deceit of Laban by Jacob, and what is its significance? Because after Jacob is deceived, Laban has given him a very strange answer to account for his deceit. He says, these things, lo yaseh kein bimkomenu. I now am chapter 29 of Genesis, Bereshit, verse 26. Lo yaseh bimkomenu, latet hatzira lefnei bechira. He says, in our place, we don't give the younger before the older. Now I ask you, where in the world do parents want to marry off their younger daughter before their older daughter? Probably nowhere. So why would he say, Lo bimkomenu? In our place, we don't do this. You don't do this anywhere. Everywhere in the world, if you have a bunch of daughters, everybody wants to marry off the older first and the younger last. Nobody wants to marry off the younger first and let the older get older. So why does he say bimkomenu, in our place? So some people think it's a shtoch. A shtoch is a Yiddish word for saying he's edging Jacob on. Because when Jacob came, he said, what are you doing here? Well, he says, I'm running away from my brother Esav. Well, what did you do there? He says, well, I stole his blessing. How did you steal his blessing? Well, I played the role of the older. And therefore he what? Played the role of the younger. So what did he say? So what does Laban do? Just think about this for a moment. Laban deceives Jacob. How is he able to deceive Jacob? Because it's dark. What is the act of deception? He replaces the younger with the older. And then he tells Jacob, in our place, we don't exchange the younger for, the younger for the older. Well, where do we do it? He learned it from Jacob. In your place, you think you can get away with that. And whose place did you take? Esav. Now, the blessing that was given to Rivka said, Rav Yavod Tzair. The older will serve the younger. Now, listen to the word Tzair. That's why in the verse it says in verse 26, Lo yaseh chein bimkomenu letet hatzeira. See, you try to replace the Tzair, the younger one. We don't replace the Tzira. Before who? The Bechora or the Bechira. And what did Esav call himself? Bechoratcha. I am Yaakov Bechorcha. You are what I'm Nochi Bechorcha. I'm your firstborn son. So these two words, Tzair and Bechorah, ring here, ring with the story of Yaakov, except they're reversed. So now Jacob is getting his comeuppance. What's the purpose of saying Jacob giving his comeuppance? Apparently the idea is that the end does not justify the means. It is clear that Jacob deserved the blessing. It was not only foreordained by God, but Esav sold him his Bechorah. And the word Bechorah and the word Beracha both have four letters. Both begin with a bet, both begin with a hey. Only the two middle letters are metaphysized. Bechorah, Bracha. According to Yaakov, if you sell one, you get both. According to Esav, you can sell one and keep the other. He sold his Bechorah and hoped to retain what? The Bracha. According to Jacob, he said what? It's a package deal. Therefore, Jacob said, I have a right to that blessing. It is really mine. And it's only because my father is blind, he doesn't realize that Esav doesn't deserve it. So what did he believe? The end justifies the means. He was willing to deceive his father for his foreordained goal in life, which was to be the covenantal successor. Clearly, the goal is admirable, but the means were not appropriate to the goal. And therefore, he had to suffer the consequences. What's the consequences? It's called midah keneged midah. As you do to others, so will be done to you. As you deceived your father, an old man, so will an old man deceive you. As you deceived because he was blind, so you will be deceived in darkness. As you deceived by taking the place of the older, so will, in this case, the older take the place of the younger. And of course, Yaakov must have caught on, because the choice of words, tzira lefnei bechira, made it ring, and Jacob realized that he was getting exactly as he did. And if you look at it, he stopped complaining. He then asked, well, what can I do to make up for it? But he did not try to correct him for the original act, because he believed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would structure the situation, midah keneged midah, to teach Jacob the overwhelmingly important lesson that the end does not justify the means. And if the means are not just, then the ends are not just. And Jacob, the covenantal chosen one, who clearly deserved both the bracha and the bechorah, cannot use his exalted ethical religious status to compromise the moral standard, realizing the end does not justify the means, and as the end must be just, the means might be just. And to conclude, this was the comment of Rabbeinu Peshischa, who commented on the phrase tzedek, tzedek tirdof. You should pursue justice, justice. He asked the question, why is justice repeated twice? And the answer he gave, simply to realize that the means of justice must be as just as the goal of justice. And that's our discussion of the Sulam and the deceit of Yaakov. And now I turn it back to Mayshe before we open up to everybody else.
So I have a question, if that's okay, not so much a comment. And I'm curious to hear what Rueven you have to say on it. So yes, the ends should never justify the means, or the means shouldn't justify the ends if it's the wrong way. But we see that over here it worked out. In other words, there was a price to pay, and a steep price, an extra 7 years, total of 20 years living with Lavan. But in the end, there are 12 tribes. There's a Dinah. He ends up marrying both Rachel and Leah. And, in its own functional way, it works out. So from one side, I hear that he definitely has to pay the price. And Lavan, interestingly enough, schools him on that. And Yaakov agrees to be schooled by even Lavan, Ha'arami, right, who's a deceitful one. I guess you can learn that maybe the comments, we can learn from everybody something, right? But if Jacob would not have done this in order to get the brachot, what would it look like? Would Asa be the leader of the Jewish people? So I just have a little bit difficulty understanding this idea of, yes, it's not okay, and yes, there's a price to pay, and there's a punishment for anything you do wrong. There's a day of reckoning for sure. No one's suggesting that there shouldn't be a day of reckoning, but you can, I'm trying to understand and saying that maybe, he was willing to take one for the team and pay the price for it, a steep price for it. And yet at the same time, in listening to your Torah, it seems to challenge that. So I'm wondering if there's any reconciliation there.
Well, that's a very profound question, because I think we would all agree that Yaakov was the better candidate as a covenantal successor than Esav.
Right, and he knew that. His mother
knew that. Upon that the goal was the right goal, and that Yaakov was right to strive to reach that goal. Still, the question is the means. So I make two reflections upon this. One is the Zohar, which constantly says, Tov v'ra b'shamshim b'revuvia b'lamazeh, that good and evil are always intertwined. Yeah. Meaning, not good does not come in a pure form, and evil does not come in a pure form. Nonetheless, the whole assumption is that Jacob thought his father was physically blind, which is true, and therefore blind to the behavior of his children. He also, Isaac says, that once you give a blessing, you cannot take back the blessing, although you can revise it, which is what he did for Esau. But he can't take the blessing which is given to Yaakov. Now, when Yaakov leaves to go to Aram, his father calls him in. And what does he do? He gives him Birkat Avraham. This is the first time he uses the expression Birkat Avraham, which means the Abrahamic blessing, which Rivka thought that Yitzchak was to go to Yaakov. Yitzchak had already reserved it for Yaakov. But just because Yaakov deserved Birkat Avraham does not mean he does not deserve a blessing from his father, a blessing of security and economic prosperity, which is the content of the blessing he gave him, economic prosperity. What Jacob did is he rushed it. He should have trusted his father to realize what's going on, because his father really knew that only Yaakov deserved Birkat Avraham, but it has to be given voluntarily, not by deceit. So the phrase that Yitzchak uses is, he came b'mirma, mirma. And Yaakov, when he complains to his father-in-law Lavan, or his uncle, he says, Lama remitani, remitani. Why did you deceive me? Was the exact same word that Yitzchak used, which means he realized the deceit, he who uses the means of deceit opens it up for the goal of deceit. So I think I agree with you, Mayshe, that Yaakov is the foreordained covenantal successor. And Yitzchak knew it, Yaakov knew it, Rivka knew it. But there was what? A mistake in timing. And I want to suggest to you, one of the mistakes in timing is because Rivka and Yitzchak did not talk to each other. You find Yitzchak talking to everybody in the whole story, Rivka talks to Yaakov, but you never find Rivka and Yitzchak asking, what's that bracha about? You get it? Because she thought her husband was blind, and she thought she was foreordained to favor Yaakov because of the divine oracle. So what did she do? She went her own way. Maybe if they had involved in better communication between the two, not having the resentment of one mother choosing one son and a father choosing another son, causing a family conflict, each one trying to manipulate the other to their own advantage, the thing never occurred. So it's pity that it occurred the way it occurred. But if it had to occur, that means ultimately Yaakov had to get the blessing. Mayshe, I'm totally on your side and agree that the end goal was worthy of it, justified it. No, but end goal is justified. But nonetheless, there are alternative means of achieving that goal.
I just wanted to first of all thank you and appreciate that. You just triggered another idea that I shared last week. It says that Sarah had a problem also with how to bring up the children. We know this. She had Yitzchak. She got excited. She wasn't so excited about Yishmael. So she has a conversation with her husband. Maybe it wasn't the most pleasant conversation. Maybe it wasn't the most amicable. Maybe it was a little bit heated, perhaps. But they have some tension in this conversation. But they're having a conversation, and Hashem ultimately says, "Kol Hashem l'chsara shema v'kolo," right? So they have a difference of opinions. In other words, our matriarchs and patriarchs have a difference of opinions on how the children should be and how we should treat the children. So it's not the first time we had this. So you would think that Rivka would learn from her in-laws, say have the conversation. So why didn't they have the conversation? They just it was only one generation back. They had a difference of opinions on how to handle the children. Of course, Hashem says whatever mom says, you have to listen to. So she could even use this as a backup. She should have said, "Look, we have a pasuk. Why are you even considering Esav? Hashem already settled the dispute between the husband and wife in the previous Parshas. You're supposed to listen to me. Why is it?" She could have used that, and yet she doesn't. And so I heard an interesting thing is because the tiger mom, as it were, in Rivka, she saw something special in Yaakov, and not in the same way that she saw in Esav. Whereas Yitzchak, he saw Esav as, quote unquote, the problem child. And he wanted to do everything he can to bring him back. He wanted to save him. And he was willing to go ahead and spend the extra time and the extra attention, the extra love to bring him back. But in the end, the Rivka mama knows best, but she wasn't able to, reach him on that level. He was too locked in on trying to help Esav. So she has to do the backwards flips. And then Yaakov learns from that, and therefore he's paying a price for it. So it all comes together. I say we open it up to questions.
Mayshe, I'd only say one thing.
Sure.
We are both fortunate to have both have very strong, competent wives. So we've been there and done this.
I can't speak for your wife, but I can speak for my wife.
Okay. Any questions, reflections, comments from anybody around? More than happy to entertain a comment or a question. If you only have a comment, not a question, just inflect your voice upward at the end so we can interpret it as a question and respond accordingly.
Yes, I have a question.
Please identify yourself.
I've always seen sibling rivalry in the Torah with lots of hesitation, and especially parental favoritism. It seems to be kind of justified, like as we said, in the end, it was okay. So how does it work for us in the world today? Like, is it okay for parents to show favoritism?
I'm happy to take a quick crack. Hi, Donna. Thanks for your question. Thanks for joining the class. So it says, as I repeated before, Mayshe avot siman labanim, right? The ways of our forefathers is something that we should learn from. Now, at the same time, not everybody's going to have 12 children, and not everybody's going to have 4 wives. And so there is nuance that we have to appreciate in terms of what's going on here. When Jacob favors Joseph, it's more than just, there's what we call pardes, pshat, remez, drusho. There's many different understandings in Torah, but there's 4 basic ones, right? The simplistic, the remez, the hint, drush is the deduction, and so there's the esoteric, the essence, Zohar, Kabbalah, etc. So it's multi-layered, everything that we read, and that's why commentary is so important, and that's why classes are so important, and learning is so important, Because if we just read the Torah as is, you put film between your eyes, not above between your eyes. And so I think it's important to understand these nuances. I think they raise questions, and they're fair questions, and discussing those questions and learning those questions give us a deeper insight. But you're right in pointing out that there seems to be, an unusual amount of favoritism. But it's more than just the kid that they like and the specific they like. The 12 tribes, they were all, they're all Yehuda, the king, the David branch. Mashiach comes from Yehuda, not from, So yet he favored Yosef. Each one has its unique quality and unique specialty, and we need to learn from that. And it's not necessarily on the face of it that he favored one versus everybody else. So there is, on shot level, there is that, and we have to accept that and try to understand that. To that, hopefully Rueven weighs in. But I'm saying that you can look a little bit deeper into what is the message of the Torah for us in those unique findings, like we have in this parsha. How could Jacob and Rachel conspire against their father? So I'll let Rueven.
Now, I would only add that the avot and imahot are not portrayed as perfect individuals, and sometimes you learn more from a person's mistakes than the correct activities. So while some of them preferred one child over another, it looks to be that the Chumash is telling you, look what happens when you do that. Sometimes only by seeing the negative results are you changed. My father was a doctor in St. Louis, and he one time took me downtown and he showed me some drunks in the street. And he said to me, you can give a talk all you want on the bad results of drinking too much, but if I show you a drunk in the streets and shows you the results, that will shake you up more than anything else. And since then, I've become drunk very, very little, many fewer times because of that, probably. Meaning, sometimes you teach through a negative example, and when you see the result of the negative example, it shocks you. You say, don't do that. So if even the patriarchs had a normal inclination for favoritism, let me tell you that even they, when they favored somebody, it turns out negatively. Therefore, be extraordinarily careful.
I like
Hi,
that.
guys.
Questions or comments, please.
This is Sammy. Can I ask you a question also?
Please.
The Chachamim bring that the word sulam is the same gematria numerical value as mammon, money, as well as chacham, a wise person. Can we talk a little bit about why sulam is used a lot? What are the other ramifications of that, and what's the connection with mammon, money, and chokhmah, wisdom? Thank you.
Well, Sammy, before I answer the question, there are very few people I know who combine so well chokhmah and mammon together. So maybe why don't you give the first comment?
Thank you. That's very kind of you, Rabbi.
I can take a first stab at it if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll go after. So sulam, okay, and money, and chachma, all of them, all three of those are not an intrinsic value in itself. They're all a means for something greater. It doesn't help you to have a lot of money unless you spend it wisely, unless you invest it wisely. Money in itself doesn't do you much. A ladder also. You can have a ladder. I had workers here last week. They left a ladder behind my house. It's lying flat down. It doesn't reach up. It doesn't reach down. There's no use of it. They're all conduits for something greater. And chachma also. Chachma, the idea is koachma. The idea of chachma is to reach a higher level, to connect to something greater. We don't amass knowledge for the sake of amassing it for ourselves. We amass knowledge so that we can elevate ourselves. That's just the first thing that hit me when you brought the question up.
So it's like a means to an end, like we were talking earlier.
Correct.
Right.
Well, there's also a verse in Yirmiyahu, which is also basis of the statement in Pirkei Avot, which puts together a chacham, an ashir, and a gibor. So it says, Ezu chacham, halamed mikol adam, which is a remarkable definition, because normally we define people as wise who have a lot of knowledge. You go to a wise man because he's accumulated a lot of knowledge, and you hope by virtue of that knowledge, he will also become wise. But here it says, Ezu chacham, halamed mikol adam. What makes you wise? The capacity to learn from everybody. That's a very difficult thing. to learn from somebody you know is your intellectual inferior, who knows half of what you know, in a culture of Judaism which admires so much knowledge, says the real wise person has the capacity of learning from multiple types of people. Therefore, wise is not what you have. Wisdom is the ability to see it in others. Then it says, Ezu Ashir. So you'd expect, who is wealthy? A guy who has $1 million, or nowadays $1 billion, or even more than that. In other words, accumulates wealth. But apparently, you're as wealthy to the degree in which you don't need something. So the samech bechelko, many people think you're satisfied, you don't want anything more. But I don't think so. I think a samech bechelko means a person who gets joy from his portion. Now, I learned this from a tailor. I was buying a new suit one time, and I put it on the suit, and I said to the tailor, what does it cost? And the tailor looked at me and says, boy, is that a stupid question. First, ask yourself, do you like the suit? And if you don't like the suit, right, why would you pay it no matter how cheap it is? And if it's too expensive, we can work on that. So he says, Asamech bechelko, you buy a suit, does it give you simcha? And I think this explains when you buy a new garment, especially if it's expensive, we say the bracha, shechiyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'giyanu lezman hazeh, which means when you buy something, if it gives you simcha, what do? You express a blessing. So both these things, wisdom, as you mentioned, and wealth, are used to reach out. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're not just a play on the word sulam, but it's a play on the meaning of sulam, because the sulam extends ourselves beyond ourselves. And the purpose of wisdom and wealth, I would assume, is the same thing, to extend ourselves beyond ourselves.
Very nice. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? If you don't want to ask this question, just make a comment.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Yes, please identify yourself.
Oh, my name is Zach. Hi.
Yes, go ahead.
So the question is, does the fact that Yaakov deceived his father justify why Laban deceived him? Like, was Laban's true motive to teach him a lesson, or was it just to deceive him? Is the part two to that, I guess.
Oh, that's a great question. But I do not know, nor does anybody know, the motivation of Lavan. All we do know is that the Chumash sets up a situation where Yaakov realizes that his actions boomerang on him, and that once you do something, you legitimate it. And if you do it, then it can be done to you. That's the principle of midah keneged midah. So I'm not too sure. Maybe Lavan was trying to just teach him a lesson. But I don't think he was trying to operate on a theological level, but that we don't know. The point I don't think is so much Lavan's motivation as Yaakov hearing these words and realizing that God is involved in his acts and he's going to be held accountable for his acts. And despite the how admirable the goal is, the means have to be as admirable as the goal. Otherwise, you pay the price.
Thank you.
By the way, if somebody else has another answer, please weigh in. Nobody has a monopoly on the responses here. Otherwise, let's open to other questions. Unless somebody should just wait. Mayshe, you want to weigh in on this?
No, that was good. But I'm looking at a gematria sefer because I noticed there was from the previous question of Sulam, Mammon, and Chachma, in terms of it's gematria of 136. I want to see if there was a connection there, but it'll take me a little more time than passing by. So let's if there's another question, bavakasha.
I have another question.
Yes.
Identify yourself. Give your name.
My name is Avi.
Yes.
My question is, when you were talking about when Yaakov was getting the bracha, you were saying that he, since his dad, he knew his dad was blind, he was tricking him, and he didn't think that he would be able to tell, at least on that level. But it also seemed to me that it's possibly like a lack of emunah. Like he didn't think like he would be getting the bracha, which he deserved. So he needed to take it into his own hands, or his mother did, or something like that. Like if he was supposed to get it, he didn't need to intervene theoretically. Is that correct?
Well, that's the question: is emunah make you passive or active? So you're saying emunah, she should have waited till God implements the plan. I think her understanding was if God made her privy to the divine plan, then she has a responsibility to implement it. She doesn't rely upon God to do it. Otherwise, why would God tell her? So she said, God made me privy to the plan. I now have an opportunity to implement it. Then my emunah is I have a mandate from God, and it's my job to fulfill it. Emunah does not mean passive, allowing God to do it. Emunah means taking the energy that God gives you and using it.
Can that thought or whatever be like expounded on other things as well, or is it kind of specific to that one moment?
No, I think emunah, it means you act on it. There's a distinction between doing and believing. I don't accept. Doing translates your emunah. So if you really believe in something, you do it. And if you don't do it, I can doubt your belief. But if you have a mandate from God, then you are obliged to seek to implement it. You can't rely upon God to do it. Otherwise, why did he make you a partner? You got a partner, everybody's got to play their role.
When we say one of the 13 principles of Maimonides, ani mamin be'emunah shalema b'vias hamashiach, ani mamin, right? What does that mean? What do I believe? The b'kol yom yavai. Everybody's familiar with the song. Ani mamin be'emunah shalema b'vias hamashiach. What do we believe? B'kol yom yavai. So the interesting teaching on b'kol yom yavai. B'kol yom yavai is not any day he can arrive, but the entire day should be fulfilling ourselves with the possibility of making that change that allows him to arrive. So I'm just echoing what Rueven said, that the idea of emunah is not that I believe. You can put a bumper sticker, you believe. You can have a button, you believe. But how you behave and how you conduct yourself, a little bit kind of what I was saying in the first part of sharing in this class, is to do something. Baruch Hashem, everybody here realizes we're in a strange time. You take a half hour, you take 40 minutes, join a class, learn some Torah. You're doing something, you're elevating yourself. And that same thing comes with Hanukkah. Something very simple, but do something, lean into it. And I think that's an important, point that you bring up, and it's an important response that Baruch Hashem, you give us the opportunity to give. We all believe things are going to be okay, and they will be okay. Because kol man davar rachman l'tav avdim v'tev atav l'heitiv, everything Hashem does, he does for good, and his nature is doing good. But you got to do something, You can't just wait. The famous joke about the guy in the helicopter, right? With the flood is coming, the boat goes by, and then the helicopter goes by. You got to do something. Grab the rope, pull an oar. So I think now more than ever, I'm really encouraging everybody to do more things. You can wear a mask. You're still allowed to go outside. You can check up on a neighbor. You can make the phone call. Do things. I find in my own personal, I know I'm a rabbi, so I get paid to do things, fine. But even so, as we all know, even in the rabbi sphere, even the nonprofits, a lot of people are waiting for this thing to pass by to ultimately, jump back in. Don't wait for anything. Jump back in now. Do things. And you'll get more emunah when you do things. They play back into each other. You have emunah, do something. You did something, you have more, so.
Thank you very much.
Avi, to give you an example, I have a son who's a Mashiachist. And on his answering service, he used to always say, he would conclude saying, what are you doing to bring the Mashiach now? That was his motto.
I believe he's on I think he's joining our class.
Was he on? I don't know if he's on or not.
I believe he's on, but I believe but isn't everybody a Mashiachist? Don't we all believe every day that Mashiach is coming?
My point is, it's not enough to believe it, as you say. What are you doing in action, which translates to make it more real? That's all.
Got it.
This is the connection between emunah and masim.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question, Avi. Anybody else?
Yeah, it's JC. So I had a question. I thought
I think you're the second Jew who called himself JC. Am I right?
What's that?
Are you the second Jew who called himself JC?
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Okay.
So I was wondering, is there any kind of I don't know, is there any conflict with respecting your father and mother and what Jacob and Esau kind of did to make all this happen?
Oh, I think so. I mean, let Mayshe weigh in, but the trouble with Yaakov is, not his trouble, his dilemma was, he was caught betwixt and between his mother really pushing him into this, putting the clothes on him, even telling him the curse will be upon me. So it wasn't like it was Jacob's initiative. Either he did what his mother told him. There was no way whether he could honor Kibbut Avim together in this case. He had to make a choice. And he went for Kibbut Aim, his mother, because he also believed that the Bechorah had been sold to him. And according to his belief, the Bechorah and the Bracha go together. And his son, his brother, whose mitzvah was Kibbut Av, according to the Midrash, who really honored his father, is deceiving his father. So in these situations, he thought he had to take the divine mandate in his hands. I understand him. Nonetheless, to understand somebody and to sympathize with him is not exactly to legitimate it.
Right. And I agree with Rueven on this one. And that's also to Donna's question she brought up earlier in terms of favoritism. In other words, we see in this parasha clearly a unique situation between husband and wife and a family dynamic. That's not necessarily something that you want to replicate in your own family. The ways of our forefathers and foremothers is something that we need to learn from, and learn from what the results are. What were they trying to achieve? Not necessarily specifically, even this story of Yitzchak and Yishmael. Wasn't a pretty situation, and the world is paying a price for that some 3,000 years later. So don't necessarily replicate the behavior, but try to replicate what they were trying to accomplish. That was the end game. Not as Rueven said, the means are not necessarily something that we should go ahead and follow, but the end game.
That's great.
We have time for another question. Any final question or comment?
Okay.
Okay, we are thinking of doing this on a regular basis, Mayshe and I, either every week or probably every other week. So we have, we're glad that all you joined us. Hope that more of you will tell other people to join us. If people like to join in a serious discussion of the Parsha, we need to do it. And I don't mean we have another 60 seconds. If someone has a final question, please do. Otherwise,
I said a final question.
Hans. Yeah.
This is Rueven Hans. Quick question. When you mentioned about it was either representative of the climbing of the ladder, or of Jacob himself. What was that? What was the logic behind that?
Yeah, so there was a medrash that talks about, this was a dream, obviously. So what was going on in this dream? Was it an actual ladder that the angels, which is the most common way that we understand this, or the medrash talks about, was medrash Rabbah that speaks about that the commentary is that Jacob himself is as if he was the ladder, and the angels.
Oh, like metaphorically.
Yeah, and that he's the ladder that bridges heaven and earth, and the world waits to see how he's going to behave. Is he going to see himself as the feet that's in the ground, or ultimately the possibility of the top of the ladder, which in other words, every Jew has the ability to look up in heaven and be connected to Hashem. And to that, and as I said, the sky is the limit, or even beyond the sky. So as long as that was the epiphany that he got, the aha moment that allowed him to go ahead and face the angels and face love and do what he needs to do, because he's ultimately connected to a higher place no matter what.
He was focused on getting high.
Let me think about it. I didn't realize it was that much. $343?
Oh, you better mute yourself, Yaron.
Okay, thank you.
Tether.
Thank you, Rabbi Mayshe.
I would tell people, those who'd like to join us next time, if you know people, send your email to Mayshe. Mayshe, they have their email. Have you got it? Maybe you should say it out loud. And therefore, we'll create a list of people, of an expanding list of people who want to join for a serious discussion of the Parsha on a regular basis. Mayshe, can you maybe say it out loud, your email, or you want me to do it?
No, I'm happy to do it. I'm just trying to figure out where I can put it in the chat here. So
just put it there, and if people want to do it, they can then send it to others who'd like to join us.
But the subject is, Torah class. So I get a lot of crazy spam. So this will at least.
It's a Torah Parsha class because it'll be on the Parsha each time.
Like this, cleanse my inbox with Torah requests.
Oh.
This was very nice. Thank you both.
Okay.
I didn't get your email.
It's coming. Here we go. Mayshe Get Chai. We talked about getting high, Ronald, right? So it's Mayshe at Get Chai, GETCHAI.com.
GET.
Mayshe at getchai.com.
It's a little subliminal marketing there.
Okay, here, Mayshe at YJP for those that are makes them nervous. YGP Boston. This covers me. I don't want to get in trouble. You're gonna get me in trouble, Ronald. What are you doing over here? You're in Jersey. You know, Massachusetts is a different ballpark.
This is true. It's respect the laws.
Rueven, thank you for the opportunity. Everybody, thank you for coming on. I'm gonna
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we
you.
wish everybody a day of Thanksgiving.
Very good.
Yeah, happy turkey, everybody. Enjoy.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Zagazon.
Zagazun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time, Mr. Shem.
You got it. Looking forward.
Thank you. Have a great Shabbos also.
You too.
Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos.
Everybody. Stay safe.